Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Back when I was a youngster, my grandfather was very ill. My whole family went down to Missouri to see things through. He was in the hospital at the time. We knew he didn't have much time left. Now I was 12, me and my older brother, we both were sitting out on the concrete bench out in front of the house. It was about 9 o'clock at night. This is a bench where, as kids, we'd sit out with Grandpa twiddling away. It wasn't too long after it got dark, I looked down the street. It was an old country road, a gravel road. You can hear when people are walking down the road. And we see a figure drifting across the road. It was a black shadowy figure, like a black robe. In the driveway across from where we're sitting there's real thick gravel. You would not be able to go across there without making a sound. This figure drifts across the gravel right to the edge, about 15 feet from where my brother and I are sitting. We looked at each other and I was thinking to myself, Grandpa is dead. As I thought that thought, the figure just bowed its head as if to do an affirmation bow, as in a yes, and drifted back. I looked at my brother. He looked at me and said, I saw it too, I think Grandpa's dead. When we went into the house, I told my mom. My dad was at the hospital with my grandpa. I told my mom and my Grandpa just died. No sooner than we said that the phone rang, it was my dad stating the obvious. I think it was a close encounter with the Grim Reaper.
I had an odd experience when driving across the North York Moors, Yorkshire, England a few years ago. My wife and I were visiting a friend's holiday home for the weekend, but due to work pressure we were unable to leave until late in the evening. We reached the moors about 1:30 a.m. For England, the area is pretty lonely and traffic is non-existent at that time of night. There are few roads and very little around, just woodlands, open moorland, farms and the odd village. Obviously no street lighting, so it is almost pitch black with a vague glow from Teesside on the northern horizon. All of a sudden, we caught sight of a tall black figure walking towards us in the road. We had been doing about 50 kilometers per hour, so I slowed right down to 15 or 20 as we approached it, but I couldn't quite take in what I was seeing. The best description I can give is the Black Riders from the Lord of the Rings films. It was dressed entirely in a long black robe that covered its face. Just as we were passing, it stopped, turned to face the car and then started walking towards us. It gave me the creeps and I wasn't going to wait around to find out what it wanted, so I put my foot down and got out of there sharpish. If anyone had told me it was Death himself, I would have believed them. It later occurred to me that Whitby, over on the coast, has a goth scene apparently because Bram Stoker set part of Dracula in the town and they like moping around the ruined abbey. Having said that, Whitby was over 20 miles away, so it was quite a hike over the moors, and goths always strike me as a fairly inoffensive lot. What we saw exuded an air of malice.
My buddy and I were on our way to Peoria, which is about an hour and a half away. No one is around. It's one of those real clear nights. Warm summer night. Happened in June. Anyway, we're going along. Nobody around us. Around 11:45 at night, if I remember right. We're driving. Going about 55 miles per hour. We're in the right-hand lane. In the left-hand lane appears out of its own mist, a green figure about 7 feet tall. You know what it had on? A cape. With no face. Can't tell if it's fat or skinny. And it's standing still in the left-hand lane and it doesn't budge. With its arms draped out side to side. It was the Grim Reaper. It was the only thing I could think of. I used to laugh at people who would tell me about the Grim Reaper. Right when I was thinking that it was the Grim Reaper and kept it to myself, my buddy said, "What was that?" And I thought of the Grim Reaper in my mind and he said it out loud. And I looked at him with a straight face and I said, yeah, it was. That was the summertime in June and I'll never forget it like it happened yesterday. That thing was at least 7 feet tall. Never saw it again. Never want to see it again. But it was as real as you and I talking right now.
When I was a kid growing up in western Pennsylvania, there was an old abandoned railroad in the woods near my house. The railroad went through a valley with a pretty large, winding creek. There were several cuts and tunnels through the hills of the ravines and valley on either side of the creek. I'm pretty sure this railroad closed down in the early 1900s, and by the 1980s it was overgrown with the tunnels and a pretty advanced degree of collapse and looked more like natural caves. Needless to say, this was a perfect area for playing and exploring the woods for a kid. From a kid's perspective, pretty sure most parents wouldn't want their 11-year-olds exploring abandoned railroad tunnels. One year we had an exceptionally warm December and I had a few friends staying over at my house for Christmas break. Of course, I wanted to take them down to the railroad tunnels. I probably hadn't been down there since summer. As we are approaching one of the tunnels, we get stopped dead in our tracks. In front of a tunnel we see this gray, skeletal figure holding a scythe. We take off running back the direction we came. My neighborhood was about a half mile to a mile away, mostly uphill, and we came bursting out of the woods breathless in one of my neighbor's backyards. He's out doing yard work, and obviously is curious as to what we were up to. We tell him what we saw, so he assures us we did not indeed see the Grim Reaper, and offers to go back into the woods with us. So we all went trekking back down to the creek with my neighbor. We come to the tunnel and sure enough, there he is. Skeletal figure, gray, wearing a black cloak, a distorted, twisted body and holding up his scythe, which looks like it is an extension of one of his arms. He is just standing there, motionless, silently, guarding the mouth of the tunnel. My neighbor motions for us to hide, and he and the Grim Reaper have a stare down which seems to last forever. The neighbor starts laughing, to the degree of tears coming out of his eyes, and he has to sit down, and tells us to come out and see. It was a tree that was hit by lightning. The trunk basically exploded. The bark from the tree was still attached in places that appeared to be his cloak, and the twisted, exposed portions of the trunk appeared to be his body, head, arm, and side. It probably happened a few months prior and the exposed trunk would have weathered gray already. Even now knowing what caused it, it still was super freaky to look at, and still made us nervous, so we were happy to leave. This thing was so perfect it almost looked like someone had carved it with a chainsaw, but the wood was too rough and split for that to have been the case, and it was a completely natural phenomena. A few months later, I returned with a camera and some other friends to show them the Grim Reaper in the woods, but it was completely gone. I could not even find remnants of the trunk or root system from the tree, just vanished. It may be of note that we would often find satanic graffiti in the railroad tunnels, pentagrams and such spray painted on the stone cliffs and walls in and around the tunnel. It also appeared that lots of people had used the tunnels to have parties, get high, etc., as we would sometimes find syringes and burnt spoons and the likes. I probably haven't been back down to check the area out in 20 plus years, but keep telling myself that one day when I'm home to visit I'm going to take a trek back in the woods to see how things are holding up.
In 1990, Monica Paulino moved into a semi-detached backsplit house. She was 20 years old and living on her own. A week after moving in, she began experiencing night terrors. In her dreams, she would see people being killed in various ways, dismemberment, decapitation, etc. Some months later, she woke up to see a dark shadow standing in the closet, moving to the foot of her bed. At the foot of her bed, she could see what she could only describe as the Grim Reaper, dark robe, skeletal face, etc., standing there. It was even holding a scythe. She also saw, sitting on the bed, a small gargoyle-like creature. It had alligator skin and claws. It kept looking over at the Grim Reaper as if waiting for the command to attack. She initially thought it was a nightmare, but it happened night after night. She would wake up to them standing there and then, after some time, they would fade out. She began to find bruises and unexplained scratches on her body. She started sleeping on the sofa clutching a Bible. Eventually, Monica moved out and the experiences stopped. For a while. In 2018, Monica was living in a new house with her teenage son, Alex Paulino. She had not seen the Grim Reaper in 28 years after she moved out of the previous house, but she never forgot it. She often spoke of the entity and his companion to her son. In the winter of 2018, she went on a retreat/vacation. When she returned home, something very strange began to play out. She started to feel horribly ill and depressed. She experienced insomnia and felt restless. She woke one day to the sound of a voice, but nothing was there. The voice was ominous. A few days later, while walking down the hallway to her bedroom, as she approached the doorway, she looked and saw, standing by the end of the bed, was the Grim Reaper. The same one she had seen back when she was 20. He was exactly as she remembered. She screamed in horror. Her son ran upstairs to check on her and he too saw the entity standing in the bedroom. He stopped dead in his tracks, staring at it in shock. The thing was real. Terrified, Alex began yelling at it to leave, and it did. It appeared to vanish from the room. They looked outside, and now it was standing on the lawn, looking up at them, almost as if it had teleported out of the room to the outside in the blink of an eye. Lori Kindrade, a psychic medium, was soon brought in to clear the house. During the investigation, Lori, Alex, Monica, and another investigator opened the bedroom door and heard the words evil, hell, and blood, though nobody was in the room. Lori sensed it was an evil entity, and she proceeded to conduct a crossing over ceremony. She managed to excise the demon. Things returned to normal, and Monica got over her illness.
My name is Diane Martinez from Los Angeles, California. My first encounter with the paranormal, I was 22 years old and I had my 2-year-old son Gabriel. For a short time, we needed a place to stay due to a divorce which I won't go into. My best friend lived with her folks and they very generously let me live in their house in Long Beach, California, free of rent until I got back on my feet. My son and I shared the apartment with my best friend. I will call her Sharon. Now, before we had ever moved into that house, I remember Sharon telling me every once in a while, in the dead of the night, she would feel her bed sink down as if someone had sat there, but when she would look, no one was there. She also said she would feel something was on top of her holding her down. A few times, it would choke her. My son and I had moved in and we were there for a few months, living very happily with absolutely nothing out of the ordinary, until one night. Sharon's bed was in the corner of the room, right up against the wall. Now I slept on the left side of the bed, facing the wall. My son was in the middle. Sharon was on the right side, facing out toward the rest of the room. I was sleeping on my side of the bed, as usual. I remember I kept waking up in the middle of the night and I had this feeling that multiple hands were reaching up to grab me and pull me down, which is impossible since the bed was right up against the wall. You couldn't even reach down there without moving the entire bed. I remember having that feeling all night long, but I kept waking up thinking I was going to see multiple pairs of hands reaching up to grab me, but there was nothing. So the next day, I decided I was going to go to sleep on the right side of the bed facing out. This night I will never ever forget. We had all gone to bed, myself facing out, Sharon in the middle next to me. This night my son was on the side facing the wall, cuddled up next to Sharon. I don't know why I woke up in the middle of the night, but I did. You know how sometimes you wake up in the middle of the night, open your eyes and go right back to sleep. Well, that's what happened, but as soon as I opened my eyes, I saw it. It was huge, at least 7 to 8 feet tall. If it had been standing up straight, its head would have hit the ceiling. It was all black. It was wearing the typical death outfit, you know, the one seen in the cartoons or drawings, the long black cloak with the hood over its face, but the death in drawings usually had a white skull. The thing in the room, which I really believe now was a demon. It had no face. It was in absolute darkness. The hood of the cloak looked like it was over the head. I could see absolutely no face. Just blackness. I knew I could see it. Now, even though it had no face, I knew it was staring at me. It was all bent over from the waist, facing forward, looking straight at me. As I said before, it wasn't standing up straight, not so far forward, just enough back I could tell it was looking directly at me. And, as I said, it had no face, but I knew it was staring at me. All I could feel is that it had sheer hate for me. I could literally feel the hate pouring off of it. It hated me so much, it despised me. It hated that I could see it. I could feel this unidentified, utter hate, but that's what it was absolutely. I think it might be hard to understand. I don't think you could ever feel that from a human, no matter how much they despised you. I could feel that pure hate radiating from this creature straight to me. I was beyond terrified. I knew I couldn't scream even if I wanted to. I remember trying to whisper my friend Sharon's name, but nothing came out. I was just too scared to even touch her. All I could do was, like a child, pull the covers over my head. I don't know how long or what, but I eventually fell back asleep. The next day I woke up. As soon as I opened my eyes and saw Sharon was awake, I said, "Oh my God, Sharon, last night I saw this huge black thing. It was standing and staring at me." Before I even said where I'd seen it, Sharon said, pointing.
"Over there in the corner."
"Yes, in that corner."
"I see it all the time."
"What? Oh my God, you see that thing all the time?"
"Yes."
That was pretty much the end of that. I prayed that I would never have to see that or anything like that again, and I never did see anything like that again.
2006, San Antonio, Texas. Patrick Newcomb, an ex-military man who served in Iraq, was now working as an EMT. He had been called out with his partner to assist with an injured person who was in the parking lot of a recently abandoned hospital. The place had only been abandoned a few months earlier and the police kept an eye on the place, including having chains on the door. When Patrick and his partner arrived, they found the doors to the facility wide open. They assumed the victim had crawled inside and so they ventured inside to find him. The building seemed empty. They made their way down to the basement, which was once an old Civil War hospital morgue. In there, they found bodies in body bags laid out on various gurneys, which they found to be bizarre since the building was abandoned and there shouldn't have been any bodies there at all. Suddenly there was somebody standing there in the door, Patrick recalled. He described him as 8 feet tall, dark cloaked, with no face, completely blank white. Patrick could only describe it as the Grim Reaper. He claims he felt a fear on a level beyond what he could explain. Him and his partner immediately rushed out of the building. They called dispatch to tell the police that there had been a break-in at the hospital. They did not mention what they saw. Patrick and his partner vowed never to talk about it. Later, Patrick heard that the police arrived and found the place quiet. The padlocks and chains were still on the doors and there was nobody around. For weeks, Patrick was very careful. He thought the Grim Reaper was coming for him. Soon after, he quit. He is now a supervisor in the construction industry. 2016, Sharon Springs, New York, Lori Davis, her husband, Josh, and their child, Anthony, purchased a farmhouse with lots of land for her animals and a creek. She spoke to the previous owner on the phone who warned her the house was haunted. Apparently they had seen little kids outside and heard noises/footsteps on stairs. Lori was skeptical. While doing renovations, Lori claimed that she was pushed off a ladder. After she got up and left the room, the door slammed behind her. Lori told herself it was nothing. One day, when her husband and kid were away, strange things happened. She could hear someone going up and down the stairs, followed by something being dragged across the floor. She heard a man's voice, and a grunt at the top of the stairs. Her son began seeing black shadows going out his bedroom door and into another room. He told her that they looked like people, a really tall man. They would be in the room and then disappear. Around this time, Lori caught mononucleosis. Her husband became more and more irritable and angry. Lori found 3 deep scratch marks on the back of her neck. Right after, their animals started dying, including 3 dogs, a lamb and some horses. Investigators were called in and immediately sensed a dark presence. One of the investigators even saw a dark shadow scurry up the stairs. While confronting the entity, she described hearing a loud crash. She said it felt like the house lifted up and dropped. The other investigator also heard it. They performed an exorcism on the house. During this, Lori's eyes went black. She growled and went crazy. They heard knocking sounds. A cross placed on her forehead left a red mark. Eventually, the exorcism worked. Lori was free. Within a day, Lori, Josh, and Anthony were in the process of moving. The investigators claim, looking back, that it was one of the most frightening cases they ever worked on.
It was March 2006 and I had barely found out I was pregnant, maybe about 2 weeks. I stayed the night at my boyfriend's house. The community he lived in, I was told, used to be a burial site, but I don't have confirmation of it or know if it has relevance to my night. It was around 3 a.m. I woke and as I laid in bed I saw 3 gargoyle-like figures crawling, one to the left of the bed coming out, and on top the open bathroom door frame, another on the ceiling slightly to the right of my feet, another farther to the right corner. I got so scared I closed my eyes as tight as I could, crying and begging my boyfriend to wake up. He was confused. I told him I was seeing things and to turn on the bathroom light. He told me there was nothing there. I slowly opened my eyes only to continue seeing them, in addition to the Grim Reaper in the corner between the closet and the closed door leading to the living room. I closed them again tightly, asking what time it was. My boyfriend told me it was 2 a.m. I screamed, "No, it's not. No, it's not. It's 3 o'clock. Check the cable box." In my head I knew it was the only clock that adjusts to daylight saving automatically. and heard about 3 a.m. not being a very holy hour. To his surprise, I was right. It lasted a whole hour and didn't stop till 4 a.m. on the dot. Even his rosary he gave me within the hour didn't change anything. This was my first and last supernatural encounter, and I have never been able to find an answer as to why it happened.
This is when I was much younger and I lived in California. I was going over to a friend's house and I was driving. I had a little MGB stick shift at the time, and I turned left on a one-way street and I pulled up in front of the place that I was going. To kind of set it up, it was two kinds of rectangular buildings facing each other. They were apartments, and there was a long walkway in between those, and where I pulled up there was a big gate where you go into the apartments with a large archway with a big, kind of, spring-loaded gate that you would walk through. So when I pulled up with the passenger side closest to the gate. I had just pulled up, stopped and turned and looked and saw that there was this figure walking down the pathway towards us. I had a girlfriend in the car with me and we both just stopped. It was, I would say, about 8 to 9 feet tall, and it looked like the Grim Reaper to me, but there was no skull, there were no hands. It was just a kind of blackness where the holes were. The robe was huge. I remember thinking that there were a lot of volumes of material and it was moving in slow motion. Very flowy, and as it moved toward us, it was just very slow, and I was instantly just horrified, scared. That's probably the scaredest I can remember being. And you know when you get that, kind of in a panic, scared situation where it's just seconds but it feels like it lasts forever, so you have a lot of time to think. So I remember my friend yelling at me to go. So I jammed the car into gear, I put the gas on it. I don't know, you have to kind of know how to drive a stick shift, but if you have the emergency brake on, you know, if you press the gas, the car will kind of hunker down and it won't go. It did that, and I had enough time in the split second to look down and say, okay, my brake is not on, and if I make it out of this, people are gonna say I had my brake on. And so the car slowly kind of edged forward. It was like it broke free and I just kind of took off. I remember driving for like 45 minutes before I would stop. I was just so frightened. I just drove completely across town. It was at night, so I found a parking lot that had really lit up. I pulled in there and just sat. I turned to my friend and said, "Tell me what you saw." And we both basically saw the same thing.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.